This episode was brought to you by Candor IQ. I vividly remember having a conversation with one of my coworkers. They casually mentioned how much they were getting paid. I did the math and it was 75% more than I was making at the time. We were at the same level, we lived in the same state, and our jobs were very, very similar. I don't think my experience is uncommon, but I get it. I've seen this story play out. You raise a round of funding, you start hiring like crazy, and as a scrappy people team, it is hard to be strategic. To truly scale your comp strategy, you need your department leaders to truly understand stuff like the pay laws going into effect in different states and countries, the salary range that they should be offering for a specific role. But most importantly, they need to be able to communicate back to both candidates and current employees the science behind it all. If any of this sounds familiar, and let's say you're a head of people at a 100 to 500 person company, go check out Candor IQ. They can help you not only build trust with your candidates and your team, but their platform makes it really easy for you to create a data-driven compensation strategy that is easy for people teams to approve and even easier for managers to communicate out. If you want to learn more, go to candoriq.com. That's candoriq.com. You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast. Today's episode will be a part of our People Leader series, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at and what they really do every day. Our guest today is Vanesa Cotlar, VP of People and Culture at PolicyMe. Vanesa, welcome to the Modern People Leader. This is it's a long time coming.
It really is. Thanks for having me, Daniel.
I feel like we had our prep call. It feels like it was January. It was probably like May, but it was a long time ago. And yeah, I'm glad you finally made it onto the show. And yeah, so let's start with good news stories. So we start every episode the exact same way, and that's with a tradition that we call good news stories. We all go around, share something, could be personal, could be work related, anything from the last week or two that you're excited about, just a way to start the episode with some positivity. And we like to let our guests go first. So if you have something, kick it off.
Yeah, sure. I have two, a work and a personal. So work, we did our in-person event in Toronto last week, which was super fun. We do 3 a year. I'm sure this will come up throughout the conversation today, but it was super, super fun. Always love getting a chance to see the team. And on the personal side of things, as you both know, I got LASIK in the last couple of weeks, and I appreciate your flexibility with moving this a few weeks so we could make sure that it worked a little bit better for my eyes. But it's been a really cool experience to see. I know this is a funny thing to say, but you don't realize what you're missing until you get your eyesight back. Just like waking up in the mornings, I like see things. Whereas before, as I'm sure maybe Steven, you know, the mad scramble of like, where are my glasses? Because I just, everything's
Oh my
totally
God,
blurry.
that's so
Um,
real.
yeah, it's like I feel like it happens to everyone with glasses. You open your eyes in the morning, you like look left, you're like, where are my glasses? Yeah, it's the standard. Yeah. And like you get up and you're like blurry world, where did I put you? It's very cool that that's no longer a thing.
That's super exciting. Um, I'm holding on to like my 2020 eyesight for as long as I can. I have a feeling in the next few years it's not going to be as great as it always has been, but that is excellent news. And I can go next. And I actually have two good news stories as well. So last week we were in Utah and we were there for one of our sponsors' conferences. We were there as like the podcast of the conference. And I think we recorded a record number of podcasts in 1 week. So we did like 18 mini
Wow.
episodes. They were all about like 20 to 30 minutes. And this week feels like a breeze compared to that. So that's my first good news. And then second good news is that this week we closed two new sponsorship deals, which brings us to a total of like 6 total sponsors for the year. And we really just started like trying to monetize in the last 9 months. So that's really good news because for the first, 9 months of doing this, I didn't pay myself. So it'll be I think my wife will appreciate it. I can start paying off some of my debt to her since she's been holding it down for the majority of the year. But that's my good news.
That's
Shout out to
awesome. Congrats.
shout out to Tori for holding it down
Yeah,
and
shout out to
letting
Tori.
me do this crazy work with you, Daniel. I have, you know what? I'm gonna go with three good newses because like you both had two, and why not? My first one is I'm gonna first two will piggyback off of Daniel. So first is like I actually have good news. When you record 18 seemingly back to back episodes, it's really hard to think of a new good news. And so we'll see. I haven't listened to those episodes yet, but actually it's been a week, so I actually do have like legit good news. Second is going to piggyback off of Daniel's as well, and that is that for the first time we have line of sight to both Daniel and me being employees of the Modern People Leader. Like if you listen to our show, like the plan all along was like Daniel's going in, we're going to see if we can get this to work financially. And if we can, then maybe someday Stephen can get involved full time as well. Well, our pipeline is just like absolutely surging, which is really, really exciting. And so who knows, maybe the next move is a Modern People Leader. And so that's my second good news. My third good news is I am going to Daniel's wife's parents' ranch this weekend, and we're going to get a little bit of family time and get out to a part of the country that's beautiful that I haven't been to in a really long time, South
In actually
Texas.
another country.
And yeah, I was going to say it's right on the border of the U.S. Mexico border, but it's on the
Oh,
Mexico
nice.
side.
Okay, very cool.
And if you've most people probably don't even know that this exists, a bougie ranch experience, but it's a thing in Texas, in the South, I guess, especially in Texas. And so I'm looking forward to spending some time out there.
I totally forgot that was even this weekend. But yeah, that's great news. All right, Vanessa. So share with us a little bit about your career journey. I know it's been a while since we last connected, but if I remember correctly, you have like some digital nomad, like there's like that segment of your career. Now you're the people leader at PolicyMe. Like give us the full story.
Yeah, for sure. I will try to keep it concise. I appreciate how concise both of you were right before we got into this, so I will do the same. So my career actually started in management consulting. I was doing strategy consulting for large companies. I was working at Monitor Deloitte, which is the strategy group at Deloitte. Back then, Monitor Group, which was a medium-sized strategy consulting firm, had just been purchased. So I came in working with these large clients right out of university or college, as we say in the US. And I started working, and one of the things that I loved most about my job was the so what of the people implications of the strategy work we were delivering. And in consulting, side of desk, everyone took on these extracurricular activities that were either eminence building for Deloitte or more practice building things. And I had taken on leading recruitment for Queens, which is where I'd gone to undergrad, and overseeing our alumni program. So a lot of the things that I was doing in my free time were already leaning towards that people side of things. I will say when I was studying in my undergrad, I always knew I wanted to in the people space, but to be honest, and I've said this before, I think back then, just like HR was not where the smart people went. Like, I hate to say it, but it's just like it's changed so much over time, but it was not seen as like, if you can go into management consulting, if you can go into investment banking, if you can go into any of these like really good jobs, why would you go into HR? And I think a lot has changed since then. But to go back into kind of how the transition happened, after a few years in management consulting, I was thinking about kind of like what I wanted to do next. At the time, I was thinking of doing my MBA, and I thought, I don't know, like it's not really speaking to me. And I got this ad on Facebook because that was still like, I don't even know if I had Instagram. Maybe I just got Instagram back then. And I was on Facebook and I see this ad that says, bring your job, work remotely, travel the world for 12 months with other adults. And of course, I clicked it because they had good advertising and to the right person at the right time. And I ended up going on what was a pretty crazy adventure at the time. This was like before COVID, before remote work was really a thing for people. And I joined Remote Year. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. The company still exists. They do essentially, it's like an introduction into being a digital nomad. They organize all of your life logistics. They give you a place to live, place to co-work, your flights. You pay them a monthly fee. They build a community that you travel with, and you just have to bring a job you can do remotely. Now, when I applied to this, it was 2017, and remote jobs were not really a thing and abundant back then. So I ended up taking a sabbatical from Deloitte, and I ended up doing just some consulting work on the side. And while I was on this journey, one of the other individuals who was a lawyer had an idea for what if we start thinking about coming to similarly to what you said, talking to some people leaders, seeing what some of their challenges are, see if there's something we can build around it. And we ended up co-founding an HR tech startup, which was around like early applications to careers and how to make that process essentially easier for companies that hired many people into kind of like similar role, like a big consulting class or a big law class coming in, and how to minimize the bias in that process and make it more truly like skill and aptitude based. So we co-founded that in 2018. Ended up moving to Germany with it after like traveling all around the world, Asia, Europe, Latin America. We were in Africa too for a month, and we moved to Germany with it to a startup accelerator there. And it was a great ride. It was a great journey, as most startups are. Ultimately, it failed. There were like a lot of other similar companies trying to do similar things from different angles that were just further along. Germany was a really complicated market to start in. The accelerator we really liked, but neither of us spoke German, which, looking back, probably should have picked a country with a language we spoke, but, they did say it was primarily English based. Turns out like you really do need the German, I think, to really thrive there. But ultimately after that, I just continued in the people space. I came back to Winnipeg during COVID, which is where my parents are. I'm originally from Argentina, but moved here when I was 9. So was in Canada for most of my formative years. And yeah, so as you said, I'm the VP of People and Culture now at PolicyMe. I've been there for just over 2 years. Prior to that, I was the Director of People at IQmetrics, which is a little bit of a bigger tech company that's also based in Canada, and a few other things kind of to get to that journey. But it's been definitely a really interesting shift into what I think has always been my passion over which will now be like the last 6 years, which feels a bit wild to say. But I think starting with that management consulting background gave me a really good understanding for how to work well with CEOs, which I think is super valuable when you're leading the HR side of things, because that's who you end up working really closely with too.
I totally forgot that you were an HR tech founder. I think Stephen will appreciate your response to this question, but how would you say that being a founder of an HR tech company, or just a company in general, has helped you as a people leader?
I think I just understood the pressure that our founders were under when I joined. And just like, I think when you're the founder and when you start having like 1 or 2 people on the team, we're a very small team, we're a team of 4 that we brought on. And it's just like you're responsible for other humans. And I think it gives you this greater sense of like accountability and responsibility, because it's not just about you, it's about these other people that decided to join you on this crazy journey. And like, how are you going to make it real? And I think for me, having that empathy to understand like what a founder goes through and just the challenges too, right? Of like sales, trying to get clients, trying to pivot, validating, like it's really, really hard. This is a bit of a slight tangent, but I think I was at a conference once a very long time ago, and someone said there's kind of the 2 types of people. There's the person that has the idea, they're the CEO, they're the ones that are going to kind of run with everything. And then there's the person that's like the first person that supports that person in making that idea a reality. And they were saying how both people are super crucial to making a startup a success, but it's also really important for you to know which of the 2 you are, so that you can feel most fulfilled in your day to day. And I would say until after I was a founder and went through that entire experience, and after now supporting founders, I always thought I was person 1. I thought I had to be the one in charge. I had to be the one leading. I had to be the idea person. And honestly, I'm person 2. I am 100% like, I love making someone else's dream work. And I will go just as hard or harder because I'm more motivated to make that thing that that person really wants to see thrive. So it's really interesting to see kind of the different motivations that people have and how that fits in.
We follow the what's the book called, Stevens? Traction? Is that that's like the operating system that we use. And
I think it's called
Traction,
EOS.
EOS, yeah, the Enterprise Operating System. Is that what it's called? And in that book, or in that framework, there's like the integrator, which is the second person that you're describing, and then what's the other like persona? I can't remember what it's called, but it's exactly what you're describing,
Yeah.
Vanessa. So tell us a little bit about PolicyMe. Like if you were hanging out with your family and you're like on week 2 of the job, how would you have described to them what PolicyMe does?
Sure. This very simple version is digital insurance for life, primarily term life, but expanding into other products. We have critical illness as well. And the idea is that you can, for most people, buy it online in 20 minutes or less, which is pretty innovative in the space. That usually required going in person, speaking to a broker. We do have advisors, insurance advisors you can speak with if you have any questions, or that's kind of your preferred path, and it's still a much faster process for almost every person. But the idea is that we created an experience that just works a lot better for the customer.
And why should me and Steven be jealous that you get to work there?
Yeah, it's funny. I saw this as your list of questions in the prep, and I have so many reasons because I genuinely do love my job and feel lucky every day. But I think when you work at a startup or join a startup, the founders are who you need to look at the most. Like it's like, is there a good founding team and is it a really good idea with a big market space? And I think for me, I got really lucky with there being both of those things. And that's why I joined. And I would say, I think sometimes in an interview process, you wonder, are people really going to be the way they're showing up right now? And like, are they putting up the interview facade? But they were not at all. Our founders are super empathetic, immensely thoughtful in their day to day. And they just like, they let me do things the way that I think they should be done and give me a ton of ownership in the day to day. So yeah, I really do love it.
So one of the newer sections of our conversation format is what we call State of the Union for HR. And so naturally, we're going to start there today. And I wanted to just get your view on some of the trends that you're seeing in the people space right now. How would you describe, or what are the most kind of critical things that you're focused on or that are front of mind for you just in our industry?
Yeah, so I have two that I'm seeing right now a lot of. One is I think there's like a little bit of a shift, right? So when we think about remote work, return to office, there's definitely a lot coming back again around mandated returns to office. The companies that are promoting remote work as kind of being their differentiator because now they're not making people come back to the office. But I think there's this shift happening towards not looking at it as remote work, hybrid work, in-person work, but just like how can someone do good work? And removing so much of the actual physicality of where they're doing it and thinking about what are the ways that people can be most productive? What are the ways that you can create more trust in relationships? So I think there's this layer that's being peeled back of not everyone works best in the same environment, and making everyone go back to the office is not the right thing. Making everyone only be able to work at home is probably not the right thing either. So it's just about creating more of that customization around how people work best and actually giving people choice, I think is definitely something that we'll see a bit more of, like companies that have access to an office space or a co-working budget and you can use it or not, and you can kind of choose your own adventure in terms of the environments that are best for you. So that's definitely one that I've been seeing. And the other, which I think will continue to come up over the next year or so, is definitely AI and HR, and how can we make our jobs more automated, more enhanced in ways that, where does AI fit? Where does it not fit? Where is it helpful? Where is it hindering? And all of those conversations I think are definitely being had as well.
So if we focus on the first, like you're based in Canada, the company that you work for, PolicyMe, is headquartered out of Canada. And so what is the general trend in Canada? Are you seeing more? And I know we'll come back to like, all right, let's remove the physical aspect component of work so that we can have a more important conversation. But as I was listening to you speak, I realized like I'm not really in tune with what is going on in Canada right now. And so is it the same as the US that we're seeing this pendulum swing back from hybrid, remote, or like employee choice centric systems to like in office, and the focus being how do we get people back into the office? And Is that the same in Canada right now?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it a lot too. I think there's more of the let's try to get everyone in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. How can we make the office more attractive on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Like that type of approach for having days that they're trying to get people together so people can engage with each other a little bit more. I mean, in those ways, I think the US and Canada tend to work pretty similarly with some of these workplace trends because I do think what has happened, especially over COVID, just the borders became lighter around job mobility, right? So there's a lot of Canadians that work for US companies. I would say more Canadians for US companies than the other way around because the exchange rate really favors that. But I'd say because of that, just more similarities in the work trends that I've seen as well. So I don't know that I have like a very good distinction if I'm seeing this in Canada that's like totally different to the US.
And then,
And
well,
go ahead, Daniel.
oh, you mentioned AI. So you mentioned there are areas where you think it fits really well, others that you don't think it fits as well. Are you experimenting with AI yourself? And if
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, we are.
what are you doing?
Yeah, we're doing a few different things. So I think where it fits well and where it's super helpful is like for first drafts of things. Like anytime you're trying to draft a policy or like, if you're looking to do anything new that's kind of like a longer written piece or looking for ideas for events, thought starters, brainstorming, first drafts, super helpful. If you're trying to get it to like give you a finished product without review or like plugging it into things and hoping it's going to respond as you want it to, or using it as a means for like employees to ask questions. No, like none of that is as good yet as the human version, but definitely helps a lot for those kind of initial pieces that maybe you're like, oh, I want to think about 3 ways that I can better support managers that are going through X. You can for sure throw that in there, get an answer, see what it comes up with. And of the 3 things, they may not be exactly what you're looking for, but it helps you kind of think. It's a nice like thought partner, I find.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what we're finding is if you're having generative AI start from zero, like you're asking it to draft a policy or you're asking it to provide 3 recommendations, but but literally with nothing else, it's questionable, right? It's okay, and you could probably work from that, and that's a good example of the 80/20 kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
where you're using generative AI to get you the first 80% done so that you only then have to focus on the 20%. For us, what we're seeing much better results is giving it a starting point and
Yep.
asking it to improve that starting point. And that gets you closer to like 90 or 95% of the way in terms of like the end product. And so what has your experience been with your testing?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I've tried both too, like better prompting too, right? Like do something like this. You know what I mean? And you give it the example, but with these types of words or this type of tone or as though it were written for, and like you give it like a lot more specifics. I think that in my day to day, I haven't had as much of a need for that. We've definitely tested it out with a team just because we think it's fun sometimes, you know what I mean? And we'll try different things, see what it comes up with, but definitely more of that beginning component. Sometimes when we're doing like a research piece for certain things that we're looking at implementing, say, for example, like a really easy one, if you're a new startup and you're looking for like how to put together an employee referral program, something simple like that, that you literally could put it in and say, build me an employee referral program within a budget of this much for a company of this size and put together the messaging to communicate to employees. Like you could get something pretty good and then you have something pretty solid to work off of. So I think those are the areas where it can be really helpful.
In one of the interviews we had last week, one of the 18 that we did, I can't remember which guest it was, but the comment was made like everything within the HR function is going to be impacted by AI and generative AI specifically. And what do you think it's going to take to get from it sounds like to me you're very much in the initial stages of like, playing with or experimenting. What do you think it's going to take to get to like generative AI being truly a part of the day-to-day role of the people person?
Interesting. I think like if it, Because I think right now it's very much like it answers a question, right? Or it drafts something for you. It's not like it's not doing your tasks. It's like if it could ship laptops for me, you know what I mean? Like if there was a way for me to say, please organize this program and run it at the cheapest cost. I think if it had the ability to then take tasks and like own them, that would really embed it into the team. But that would be like a next level kind of ability to function, and like it would need like approvals and okays and to be like really plugged into a system. But I think that there's some things that like you do need humans for. I give the laptop example because that's one where like human touch doesn't really add a lot of value. You know what I mean? Like I don't care if like we could get an AI to do it, great. Like we don't have to do it ourselves. There's other areas where I think the human component will always be the most important, like coaching managers, one-on-ones, leadership training. There's all those things that I think that's where our I think that's where we'll always be different, like humans and like the human interaction side of things. So yeah, but I think those things that it's just like it's not value add for me to be doing it or for someone on my team to be doing it. It'd be really great if there could be like that next step of like you're not just telling me how to do it, but you can like actually do it.
Some of my
Go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was gonna say some of my favorite prompts that I've seen, they'll like take a uh they'll take a framework that already exists. So, let's say you're a manager and you're gonna have a difficult conversation with an employee, and there's a pre-existing framework out there for like having that conversation. Some of the best prompts I've seen are like using this framework and this information about this employee and the outcome I'm looking to get from this conversation. Give me a conversation flow or some prompts that I can use in that conversation. And I don't know, I just think of like how I'm using it in my personal life. And it's things like I have to RSVP no to a wedding and send like a person a text. And I'm like, how do I word this in like the nicest way possible? And surprisingly, ChatGPT comes back with some really good responses.
Yeah, we've used it too for like little messages that you're sending to employees or things like that as well for like positive tone or like we've used the same of like take this and make it more this. So yeah, I can definitely agree with that too.
Yeah, I think it's going to require, I think we may find a new position on people teams that is like an AI process engineer, because in my opinion, I think AI can do much more than like what your team's currently doing. And I'm picking on you guys as an example, but to like have it completely transform a process you already have in place takes a lot of time. Like we do
Yeah.
all of our SEO and blog, like what that is all driven through AI now for the modern people leader. And the process to complete one content piece is 30 minutes max. I think I had Daniel, we were in Salt Lake City together or Utah together last week, and I had him like time me just to show him that I wasn't blowing smoke. And and it was like 26 minutes or something. But in order for me to kind of transform that entire process, it took me about a week to figure out what are the sequences of the prompts that I need to use to instruct GPT to give me the exact output that I'm looking
that
for.
you're looking for. Yeah.
And it was like
Very
trial and error, trial
Yeah.
and error, trial and error. And it's like, what HR person has that time? Like that, it literally no one. Like all the HR people that I know are like, we're working, our teams are smaller, we're taking on more work. And so my hypothesis is that there's going to be this new role that emerges, that it's like the AI guru whose like sole job is to take the most problematic, time consuming process within HR and get that to 10% of the current time that
I feel like you guys are very excited about this. You should consider, build it out. You know what I mean? Like, I think you're very passionate about it, or keep talking about it. It's interesting. It's definitely interesting. I think in larger companies too, it'll have more of an appetite to be considered first for sure.
And so before we move on, like apart from the working constructs that we're like struggling to figure out what's the right model besides AI and HR, what's keeping you up at night as a people leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now it's probably still hiring. I think it's a weird market we're in that there unfortunately have been a lot of layoffs again. So there's a lot more talent in the market, but we're pretty picky company, I find, when it comes to hiring, just because of I would say we hire, and it's funny because every time that I say this, I'm like, a lot of companies say the same thing, but we hire really, really smart people, but that are also very humble. And the way that they work is very much like ownership based, but very collaborative. So I find that it still takes us a while to find people for those key roles. So I would say, yeah, always looking to meet other people and love when people send people my way that end up being awesome. But yeah, that would be the one. I mean, we're hiring, so it's a good thing, but I'm always just wanting to make sure that we can get the right people so that we can continue growing.
I feel like that's the perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about next. So the other week, you posted something that we've been talking about a lot recently, which is getting executive buy-in. With our other guests, we've been talking about it more broadly, but I think this post was specifically about making the business case for a new hire. So if you are a company like PolicyMe that is still very much a startup and you don't have this huge budget to hire an entire team, like what were some of the tips that you shared in that post?
Yeah, I think that one of the ones that got the most response, or that people asked me most about, is the first one that I put in there. And I'm happy to link the post back to you guys. I think you had it as well, but we could maybe tag it so people can see it if they had more questions. But I think one of the things that I've always done is, and I do this myself when I'm hiring onto my team, and then I recommend it to anyone that's looking to add people onto their teams. It's the "if I had time, I'd do it" list. And what this means is, as things come up that you would do if only you had time, having a place where you're tracking what all of these are is super helpful, because what ends up happening is, depending on the speed of the business or the team, over the course of a few weeks or a few months, that list can get pretty big. And when you start seeing things on there that can be really valuable for the business, it becomes a lot easier to then make a business case to hire someone. And the secondary thing that I always say is make that 30, 60, 90-day plan. Not only is it helpful for the person you're going to hire, and people always ask in an interview process, but I think when you're trying to get that executive buy-in, if you can show, yes, most people take the first 3 months to onboard, but these are also the ways that this human is going to add value in their first 3 months. Like, these are the key things that they're going to be doing that will enable them to be like a value added resource right from the beginning. And I think what that does is then you can kind of, I always say, like, look at the cost of, if you're using an agency or hiring in-house. I see a lot of value in great partners and agencies, but a lot of the times hiring in-house ends up making most sense depending on what you need. I'm talking about it more from like the perspective of like really expensive agencies that take on like a chunk of work that is equivalent in cost to full-time resource, and really assessing that difference. Not like a partner that's a tool that's not even like a tenth of a salary. You know what I mean? Like the moment where it's like pretty equivalent, I think is super important to value one against the other. And then what I always say is, put together a business case, just like showing all those things. Here's my list of big things that I haven't been able to do. Here's how this person will start tackling some of them in the first 90 days. Here's what it would look like if we cost out bringing a person in-house versus an agency, and like how they would do the work. And here's the value that I see this person actually bringing over the next like 1 to 2 years, which I think is the time that most people tend to stay in companies nowadays, which is like a funny thing to say, but building out kind of that time frame. And then I think that it's super important to set time to discuss, not just send off a document and be like, oh, here's the business case for it. What do you think? Because I think it's having the conversation and hearing where are the areas where you're misaligned, or really understanding, okay, why is someone else seeing it differently? And if you do need to do a bit more work, maybe they're like, oh, your list of things I'd do if I had time, we only really care about 3 of the 10 of them. Like the other 7 are not really business priority. Okay, talk through that, because you may have broader misalignment around why that's happening. Or it may be like, okay, but we're actually not sure that we'll need this person beyond 6 months. So we may actually want to do an agency right now and then consider bringing a person on full time. And it's, I think the time to discuss is super important, because it enables you to really have that deeper conversation too.
Yeah, and this is super relevant for us. While we won't be hiring another full-time employee at the Modern People Leader for a while, we definitely have a list of like, I'd do it if I had time, like more time dedicated to sales, more time dedicated to figuring out what our next product's going to be, more time dedicated to like even doubling down on what's working, like on the social side. And it really does make it a lot easier for us to justify some of the decisions that we've been making. I'm
Yeah.
just curious, like, what if you think about your "I'd do it if I had time" list, what's like the the one thing that you added to that list in the last, few months where just that one thing alone would justify a hire?
It's a good question. I will say I brought someone onto my team in February. So I'm going to tell you things that were on the list prior to then, because I will say now we're doing well. I wouldn't hire someone else right now. So there, you know what I mean? Like it's one of those things that now we're working really effectively together. We're just over 60 people at PolicyMe, and I had someone doing recruitment full time, and now I have a second person that's a people and culture generalist that can support on the recruitment side and also do a bunch of other things that were on that list. But a couple big ones were, I mean, the reason we decided we needed someone else was we needed more recruitment support at the time. And when we looked at the budget for agency help for the number of roles that we were looking to hire in 2023 alone, that made it already worthwhile to bring someone else on. And I put together a plan that showed how this person was going to be 70% recruitment, 30% people and culture for like the first 3 months, how that was going to change like months 3 to 6, how that was going to change over like 6 to 9, and like this understanding of how this person's time would be spent. So I would say recruitment was one thing that was on that list. I'll tell you a couple more because I actually think it's really interesting to think about like what are big projects that end up becoming significant enough. Upgrading our HRIS. I'm not going to say what we were using before, but we had this problem where I kid you not, like the recruitment person on my team was sending emails to candidates and the candidates were not getting them, like just not getting them. And
Oh my
we
God.
reached out to them and they were like, this is a bug, we need to fix it, and like weeks. So we had to get out of our HRIS, which had an ATS component in it. Again, we're talking like more basic tools for startups, right? And she was like manually like doing all the emails because I'm not gonna lie, we started getting Glassdoor reviews of people were like, we were being ghosted. And she was like, I swear I've sent these emails. And I'm like, this is a very real problem. Like, we can't keep doing this for months because, like, that's not okay. You know what I mean? Like, it was just so time consuming for her. And then obviously not a good candidate experience at all. So, upgrading our HRIS was high on that list. And we already switched. It's already done. We're on something new and it works. And I just didn't have the time to do all of the analysis, speak to all the vendors, negotiate, and get all that together. So when the second person started on my team, Allison, she first took on like the 70% recruitment and 30% was let's switch this HRIS. And then a secondary component that's now kind of being tackled is a few different pieces around team specific onboarding. So we did a ton of stuff the last 3 months to better support our customer success team. There was going to be a lot of hiring there and how to essentially streamline that to create a better experience. So those are just a couple examples. Honestly, there were a ton of things on that list, which is why it got big enough that it made sense to hire someone. I always say when you have enough items that are high priority, or you could have like 2 items that are just like super costly, you know what I mean? And you're like, we need to just get this done because it's a huge business issue, I think can work really well as those lists.
So I want to talk about culture and building an intentional culture remotely. And earlier this year, we had
Yeah.
Crystal Boyson from Vimeo on, and we talked about building intentional experiences for employees and how that factors into culture. She walked us through this amazing results pyramid culture model, which like imagine like a pyramid, and at the base of the pyramid is intentional experiences, and how every experience an employee has will shape their beliefs, which has a knock-on effect to their behaviors, whether it's an onboarding experience or like interactions with their manager. Like everything kind of came back to this kind of really intentional approach to culture. And I think for a lot of companies, like it's a struggle to do this in a remote environment. And I think that I feel rather that it's part of the struggle is companies are still, to your point, it's like we're talking about the physical location of where people are working, and we've gotten so kind of caught up with that that's taken the headspace of like, okay, how could we fully optimize for remote and really harness the full power of remote? So I'm curious, like, how have you been able to successfully navigate this at PolicyMe? Do you have any tips for other people leaders that are still trying to figure this out that you can share with us?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I will say, I think if you are remote first, it takes a bit more intention. And I did a workshop on this a few months ago at a people ops retreat in Napa. And it was all about how do you build a good remote culture. And I think that there's kind of twofold components to that. One is the actual work practices or like how you're running the day to day. And two is like the social practices aspect. And I think you need to be really intentional about how you're setting up both of those things for it to work well. So I'll give you a few examples of some of the things we've done. And I will caveat it with, I think I saw a really interesting diagram recently that companies that are truly, truly remote are actually very few. That means like companies that never meet in person ever. And we're not that. We are remote first, which means we are primarily remote, primarily you choose, but we get together in person 3 times a year. So like we have 3 days a year where we do meet. But to me, that is actually super important. And that's kind of starting in that social side of things. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that first. So in terms of how we're organized, we do have an office in downtown Toronto that anyone is welcome to use. We obviously don't have enough seats for everyone because there's few people that go in every day, but it's there. And if people want to have meetings as a team with the people that are within distance of the office in Toronto, they're more than welcome to. But I will say about like 30% of our employees now, maybe a little bit more, just like there's no way for them to make it in on a day-to-day basis because they're just too far. You know what I mean? We're talking like as far as like Vancouver or as far as like Northern Ontario, a 4 hour drive. But both scenarios were just like, you cannot make it in. But the option is there for those that want to live close by and want to use it. Now, in terms of the social practice and kind of how we set things up to be intentionally remote, we do 12 events. So I know it sounds like a lot, but let me explain. So the idea is that there should be a connection point every month. And 6 of these are company wide, of which 3 are these in person events. And the other 3 are virtual company wide events, usually to like celebrate something. So when we launched in Quebec, we did, which is another province in Canada, we did a wine and cheese with like Quebec wines and Quebec cheese, and everyone got a shopping list and a budget to go buy these things. And we had an expert come in and like walk us through our different cheese and wine. And it was like a really lovely, relaxing Friday end of day event that we did as a company. So that's an example of something virtual. So every year there's, like I said, 6, 3 in person, 3 remote. And the interesting thing that we also do as well is we just started this last year, but we're doing it again this year. I mean, all these practices are new, right? I'm talking about these big practices, but these shifts have been happening only in the last few years, right? So I think for everyone, there isn't like years and years and years of data as to how they've done these things, but I'm talking about kind of what's worked well in the last 18 months in particular, but like the last 2 to 3 years. But last year we chose to do our holiday party virtually as well. We had a lot of feedback that meeting in person in December is really challenging. And people that came from prior corporate jobs that were like, this was like my least favorite part of the year because I love a company party, but if it's also around the holiday season, it's really, really hard to schedule it in. It conflicts with so many things. So we're like, okay, no worries. We'll do 3 in-person events a year, none of which are ever in December. And that landed so well. So in December, we just do a virtual thing. We send people a box to their homes. We did it last year. We're going to do it again this year. So I think the reason I give that example within those 6 is part of it is adjusting to what your people need. And when you're remote first, you need to ask for a lot of this feedback. What is working for you? What's not working? What do you need more of? What do you need less of? And the other 6 are team specific. So the team has a budget. They can do whatever they want every other month. And pretty simple. Teams have done all sorts of things from escape rooms, both in person and virtually, beer tasting, all sorts of things, just lunch, casual lunch, playing games, whatever they want to do, they do every other month. And I will say we used to do more. So we also had this Monday call where we would just hop on at 9 or 9:30 for 30 minutes and go into random breakout groups. And we stopped it more than a year ago now. We got feedback that it was just too much. And everyone was like, this is too much. And we don't want every Monday morning this call. And, originally it was just casual. Then I started doing quizzes for everyone, like personality quizzes. It was just like a whole thing that we did. And we realized we were kind of overdoing it, especially when we were able to meet in person again. We were just like, we don't really need this much of the social stuff all of the time. So I'll talk just for a little bit longer. So that's kind of the social side of things. And I think just thinking about what works really well for your company, trying things, knowing it's not all going to work, and pivoting. I think if you hear three, four, five, six people telling you this is not really working, you should listen. At the same time, if you hear the three, four, five, six people saying, hey, this was amazing, you should keep going. And I think knowing you're going to try things and you're going to get it wrong and you're going to have to iterate to get it right, and right doesn't look the same at every company, is super important for the social side. And then on the work practices side, one of the hardest things with being remote first is making sure people are getting access to the right information. Right information being like, what is the company strategy? What is our vision? What are our goals for the year? What are our goals for the quarter? And making sure people know how to access that information. They know how they fit into that puzzle piece. So we do town halls every month, which there's different updates that go on from our founders. I speak at some of them. I share engagement survey results, which we also do quarterly to make sure we're getting a good pulse on people data. And so that's a really good way to get information as to what's going on financially in the business. What are the big things that are coming up? And then we also do demos every other week so that people can share the work that they're doing. And that's a really good way to see new faces, to have people actually talk about their work. And at the end of those, we do a warm and fuzzies where we just give shout outs to good things that have happened in the last 2 weeks. So very similar to your good news at the start, we do it at the end of our demos as well. So I'll pause there. There's probably more that I could tell you. There's a lot that we do and iterate on just on these like general practices that then support the things that teams do on their own. We don't mandate that teams have to do stand-ups or teams have to do things a certain way, and teams have their own ways of operating. Obviously, if something's falling apart, I come right in and help them fix it. But for the most part, we let teams operate how they operate best.
I love how you guys have provided like a general direction with some clear boundaries and have essentially allowed teams to have the flexibility to figure out like what works, what the right rhythms are, how they're going to coordinate the details. It's interesting. And I also love, before we move on, the demo concept. Daniel reminded me last week that at Workify, we were a small team, I think 10 people at the time. And I would have every week, we would have a company-wide meeting. And I would have a different person from the team, didn't matter if they were an intern or an executive, essentially demo a body of work. They would have to run the entire meeting, and then they would demo a body of work that relates to something they're doing that impacts the entire company. And it's just, it was a pleasant surprise to just hear the responses from other team members on like, wow, like I knew you were working on this thing, but I didn't fully appreciate how it impacted the company, how it impacted me, and just like the idea generation is just such a cool thing to see.
It really is. And I will say one more thing that I wanted to add that I think is super important for remote first is having a way to collect employee feedback in a regular cadence. Because just hoping people come to you when things are not going well is probably not enough for most organizations. So we do a quarterly survey, and I directly take that feedback and share it with a company and take action based on it. For example, last year we promoted managers into new roles, hired new managers, and then we were getting both managers feeling like, I don't really know how to be a manager. Like, it's my first time. And employees being like, my manager's not that great, which, like, to be fair, is totally okay to happen. You know what I mean? And by that, I mean, like, my manager's not giving me enough feedback, which is one of the questions that we ask. And we ended up launching manager and leadership training cohorts this year, which we've already wrapped up. We did as an exec team as well, so that we would get kind of the same learning as the managers on the team and have common language. And then the managers went through, it was 12 sessions for each group. And it was so well received. We're doing cohort 2 for managers next year. I'm doing some company-wide sessions around leadership training. It's cool to see when you can incorporate that feedback and continue to do more things that are just like what the people actually want.
Love it. Love it. So last week we were at this conference. It was a client of ours, and we usually at these conferences, we're just in back-to-back recordings. So they usually are very generous and offer that we can attend sessions, but we usually can't because we're just recording. But one of the keynotes last week was at the end of the day. And so Daniel and I had a chance to attend, and it was this woman named Amy Cuddy, and her presentation absolutely blew us away. And so if you're not familiar with Amy, you definitely should check her out. You may have heard her TED Talk. She did a TED Talk, I think, years ago, related to how your body language may shape who you are. And so she's like the power pose woman. So her,
Oh, yes. You know what? I think I've seen it. I think I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
and so she's like
Yeah.
working on a new book. I think it's coming out soon. And it relates to the pandemic and the effect that the pandemic had on the workplace from a psychological perspective. And so one of the things she brought up is how we are operating in a low trust environment, just generally speaking, as humans in the world. There are a lot of issues right now with trust. And so related to what the conversation we're having in building a remote culture, how do you build trust? Because if you go back to like the 5 dysfunctions of the team, like trust is the number one important factor or ingredient in a culture, a thriving culture. And so like, how do you guys build trust at PolicyMe?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think I think there's a couple things. I think there's like trusting a person as a person and like trusting that a person will deliver their work. And I think they end up kind of going hand in hand. You know what I mean? It's like when you get to know someone, you like build more of like this personal trust and rapport, and then you'll just feel more comfortable with them and you start to see them as more trustworthy and more reliable. And then it makes working together, it just like kind of helps everything. I think if you like don't really know the people you're working with, it can be really hard to just trust that they're going to deliver well. So I think our in-person events are a really big part of it. We really focus on connection when we get together in person. So for example, I'll tell you what we did on Friday. We always do a lunch component, afternoon activity, and then a little happy hour and a big evening event. And the idea is that it's modular. So, if you're a parent, need to leave early, whatever that looks like, you can still get a big chunk in during the day. And we always try to do something in the afternoon that's going to get people doing something totally different than they would in their day to day. And this time around, we brought improv coaches and we did an hour and a half workshop as a company. It was improv. We were all very scared. I was very nervous. I think a few of us were. I think, in fact, most people were, because I got a lot of people being like, what's it going to be like? Tell me everything. But they did such an amazing job just making us laugh, making us be silly together, just seeing people in like a different light, I think is super helpful for just understanding each other as humans better. Seeing everyone fail in the context of improv is just like a really good way, I think, to help in some of those scenarios. And we do different things each time we get together in person, but the idea is that we leave these events feeling like we know each other better, which I think is at the base of feeling like we can build that trust. And I'll share one other thing that we did remotely that I thought was really cool, that I recommended as a team social, but we did it within our team as well. There's a very simple question, and this is an excellent one if you guys have never done it, that I always recommend. You can do it with family, you can do it with friends, you can do it with colleagues. You are in a smaller group and you say to someone, tell me your whole story. And I know it seems simple, but you just say, no, literally everything. Like, where were you born? Where did you go to school? Like elementary school. Tell me about your tell me your entire life story from when you were born to how you got to today. And you need time to do this. As a team of 3, we barely got through, all 3 of us, in an hour. We could have gone longer. So because someone tells you their entire story, right? We're not doing these short versions that we did at the beginning. It's like detailed about these things and why they went to this school and then why they switched and how they chose to go to what they chose for university. And you just really get to know how someone thinks and the experiences that they went through. And it's a super helpful way for people to just open up a little bit more remotely. So I think those, again, are really tied to getting to know each other. And then I think that the biggest thing for us, our first value and like our REACH acronyms, everyone has different acronyms, is reliable. And I think trust is built by showing up consistently. Say you're going to do something, do that thing over and over, and then that's what creates the trust in the work. But I think that is not enough alone if you don't know the people you're working with. So I think making sure that you're feeling really good and really strong as a team is super important to then get that actual like working trust.
I love the question. Tell me your whole life story. I wish we could do that on the podcast. I wish we could hear our guest's whole life story, because I feel like that would be super interesting.
Super interesting. You have no idea. And we did it as a team. We did it earlier this year. And with a person on my team that we'd been working together for more than a year, I learned so many things I didn't know. You know what I mean? Like about their parents, how they grew up, why they are the way they are. People will tell you so many more things that you never thought about.
And I want to give a quick shout out to the Moth as well. So I don't know if you've heard of the Moth, but it's a uh, what's the best way of describing it? They tell
A
stories.
storytelling nonprofit, I think.
Storytelling nonprofit. So they're like, globally syndicated through NPR, both all the public radio stations, but also their podcast. So you can go and listen to Moth Stories, and it's like everyday people just sharing like a 5 to 7 minute story. And last week
Mm.
at the conference we went to, they were sort of incorporated into the conference. So one of the days was an award show, and they had past Moth like award winners come and give like their 5 to 7 minute award winning story. On top of that, on the final day of the conference, they had a workshop where HR people could sign up to learn how to tell their own story. So they like break
Mm.
down what makes a good story, how to just be a good storyteller in general. So if you're ever looking for another activity, I don't know if
I
this is
love
like something
that.
they offer to
Yeah.
like any company, but
Yeah.
definitely worth looking into, like in addition to something like improv,
Cool. Thank you for sharing. I'll definitely ask you for the contact details after.
for sure. So I'm sure we have a lot of listeners that are a one woman or man HR team. So for the people that are just starting a role as like a one man show, what advice would you give them?
Oh, what a good question. And I will say, I am not a one person team anymore. Like now it's me plus two more.
That's right.
So, I think there's still, I remember it well though. So I'm happy to share like what it was like when I first started and it was just me. And I think that the best, and this actually I think applies greater than when you're just one, but the more you can be like the the teaching the man, the person to fish model is so, so important when you're a team of one. And what I mean by that is putting together things that you can show someone else how to do, especially for managers, right? Like if the managers can be the ones that are then supporting their people and understanding certain things, it saves you so much time and energy of repeating yourself like 45 times about the same thing. Like, for example, I remember when I ran our first performance review cycle when I was an HR team of one, and getting the managers really clear on what it was going to look like and saying to them, can you answer the questions that your teams have? And if you can't answer it, just come to me. Just saves so much time, right? And like originally, I hadn't quite set it up properly, but when I saw the questions that were coming my way, I was like, managers, I need your help. You know what I mean? I need you to support me in this because otherwise, I can't answer 30 times the how many peers am I meant to nominate? Or where is the information for the deadline of this, and just making it super, super clear. So making sure that you're enabling managers to do as much as they can to support their people. If you're a one person HR team is super helpful. And as much as you can, I know it's hard, but document everything. And for me, that saved me so many times because instead of me having to repeat myself, I'd say, here's the Notion page, here's the Notion page. And that saves so much time. And where you think, oh, writing this is going to take me half an hour. Yes, but saying it 10 minutes to 20 people is a lot more than the half an hour of just writing that thing down. So a lot of what I did was just like write as much as I could so that I would have an easier time disseminating information as well.
It's like when my daughter asks me where the markers are, I'm like, if you were a marker, where would you be in this house? And
Yeah,
like just start her
yeah.
down the path of figuring it out on her own.
One of my mentors actually gave me a really good piece of like just feedback of like how I was doing something. And she was like, you're, when someone slacks you a question, don't answer the question. Say, here's the page that has the information. And it makes them actually go in the page to look for the information instead of just reading your Slack message and never going in the page. So next time they've actually like seen the page, so they're familiar with it. And when someone asks them, they know the page exists. But if you don't get them to go in the page and you just tell them the answer over Slack and send the page, you're like limiting their own ability to learn to do it on their own. And I was like, this such a simple, small shift, life changing.
Great feedback. Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Well, unfortunately, Vanessa, we are at that point of the show where we've got to bring things to a close. Before we do that, we have a couple of rituals that we still need to get to. The next one is what we call rapid fire questions.
Let's
Same
do
set of
it.
questions we ask every guest. You ready to do this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. I'm going to jump in. So,
Okay.
first question, how do you define a modern people leader? What are the traits and characteristics?
Modern people leader, I would say someone that listens well, that can take ownership and is super comfortable with feedback. And characteristics, I thought of them in advance because I knew I would want to give you the right ones that I actually think and not just what my brain thought of in the spot. But collaborative, reflective, reliable, and driven, I think are the four that came to me, and then I reflected on them, and I think those are it for me.
I mean, that's a solid list. So, next question. If you could go back in time and talk to a 22-year-old you, what career advice would you give yourself and why?
I think I would say don't be afraid to do the thing you want to do, even if you think it's not where the smart people go. This brings us full circle to the beginning of my story, but I think that I could have just got into HR consulting at the beginning at Deloitte and it would have all worked out pretty similarly. And those first few years would have just been spent doing more of what I actually loved. I think it was a learning journey and I don't regret any of my decisions. Like I said, it made me better at working with CEOs, but I think just like the 22-year-old version of you, I think just wants to please so many people. So I would say worry less about that and focus more internally.
Also, amazing responses. Last question. Is there anything you believe to be true about the world of work, but don't yet have the data to support?
There is, and this is related to something we've been talking about as a thread throughout, which is I truly think the best work environment is person dependent. I don't think there is one right way to do work environments. I don't think remote is the best for everyone. I don't think in person is the best for everyone. I think it matters so much based on how you work best, but there isn't that data that can show that like put people in their preferred environment and give everyone absolute choice and they will do better. There's some, but not enough. So I think if you could measure that and show that productivity was actually highest, if you let people just choose, it would be an amazing resource.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like we have the data, or we still don't even have perfect data for like remote versus in office versus hybrid, but at least some data exists out there that tells
Right.
you like how productive these people are. But there's nothing that shows, companies that, give people choice versus tell them what they need, how they need to work.
Exactly. Because I think if you could choose, you would likely be your most productive. But it's like my choice may be different than yours. Maybe you guys love going in once a week and I like going in once every 3 months. But it's like if I could show how I prefer to work and my productivity, you know what I mean? It would have to be like choice and productivity. But like, what is the actual choice and how does that vary by person related to their productivity? So it's very interesting, but really hard to measure, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So who do we need to bring onto the show next? Are there one or two people that if you could just have like 20 or 30 minutes of their time to pick their brain, like who would those people be? Like who do we need to be talking to on the Modern People Leader next?
You know what's funny? I think you guys know, but Mel and I are friends,
Yeah.
and it's so funny because I Mel was gonna be mine, and I think I talked to you guys. I don't know if we connected originally before you even did with Mel, but Mel was like, "Hello, Mel. I just spoke to the Modern People Leader humans, and they told me you're coming, and you were gonna be my recommendation." I was like, "You're on my notes." Because you were going to be mine. So that was just like a really funny moment of just like people knowing each other and like collaborating. We were lucky enough to meet. We spoke on the same panel in Regina in Canada in September of last year and we became close friends very quickly. We talk pretty regularly now. So like just a wild journey of just being panelists together yeah, she's one of the best people I know. And I would say another person that I love that I don't know if you've had on the show, Lindsay Nels from Elevate.
No.
So her and Lucy founded Elevate Leadership. They're awesome. I would be happy to connect you with either of them. They are my partner for leadership and manager training. And like the two women that I think just talking to either of them about their thoughts on certain leadership topics and development and how you get people to lead better is just so fascinating. I get the chance to talk to them, but not everyone does. So I think either of them would be fantastic on the show.
So on the Mel point, she was our surprisingly, she was our first like Latin X guest, like female like Latin guest we've had on the show. I think that makes you our second one. So you said you were from Argentina originally,
I
right?
am from Argentina. Yeah, it's funny because like I speak Spanish at home. Like Spanish is actually my first language. Very, like, you wouldn't think it because I most people are like, oh, English is your first language, but yeah, I'm actually very Argentinian. It just like doesn't come across when I speak in English.
That's awesome.
I
I'm
could
still.
actually tell in if there's some inflections in
I was
some of
gonna
your
say
Were there
that.
a few?
words. I can
Okay, God,
tell.
I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah, it's funny because sometimes people are like, you have a Manitoba accent because this is also a thing from Canada,
Mm.
like the Manitoba. And yeah, so it's funny because different parts of Canada also have like a slightly different accent. And sorry, this is a small tangent, but when I first went away to school in Ontario, people were like, are you from Manitoba? And I'm like, yeah, how did you know? They're like, your accent. And I'm like, wow, I did not know this was a thing.
It's your accent. I only know one other person that has a similar accent. So my wife, her family, she grew up in Laredo, Texas, which is a border town. Her cousin ended up marrying a Canadian hockey player. So he now has lived in Laredo for like 20 years. And because he's been a part of the Laredo culture and it's like 99% Mexican in Laredo, he now has like a Laredo accent, but he
Yeah.
still says some words like in a Canadian accent. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody else that has like a combo between like a Latin and a Canadian accent. So you're now the second person.
Well, good. I'm happy to be number two.
All right. So one word or phrase close. This is how we close out every single episode where we all respond with a word or a phrase. So it could be more than one word to close with. And if
Am
y'all
I
have
going
one, y'all
first?
should go. Yeah, because I don't have anything. I haven't even thought about it.
I can go first. I think the right word is like fulfilled. I don't know. I love talking about this stuff. I think it was a really great conversation. I loved getting to know the two of you a little bit better. I think on your if I had time list is this HR AI process person of figuring out how to do that better. I loved learning from the two of you as well. So feeling very fulfilled from the conversation.
Yeah, that was some what the magic from Steven right there. I hadn't heard that one yet, but I totally agree with him on that. I'm gonna say energy. I feel like you bring good energy, and I was not gonna lie, like my energy levels were low coming into this, just like after doing a bunch of like heads down uh administrative work, and I feel energized again.
I'm going to go with Latin X because Daniel pointed out, once it was pointed out, like it's kind of shocking to me that we're like 3 years into this and we've only had two Latin X guests on our show. And now I can't unsee it. I can't, like, we were at a conference last week, like we've been talking about, and I'm like, where's the community here? And so I'm going to end with that because I think we need more representation in the people space. So I'm grateful that we could spend the this is a little Latin X hour that we just spent with each other.
We could have
So
done it in Spanish. Do you guys both speak Spanish?
oh
Steven
No.
better than me. I
yeah, I
Okay.
could get through rough the conversation. Daniel, how would you fare in an all Spanish episode?
uh if it's like Argentinian Spanish, I probably wouldn't. I'd be lost.
Like
I
what?
can speak slowly. I've
What?
spent quite a bit of time in Mexico too. So I've been in lots of parts of like Latin America and Europe that are Spanish speaking. So I can slow
You
it
can slow
down
it down. Okay, that would
for
be my
sure. Yes.
problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
Daniel would be like, más despacio, por favor.
definitely, definitely.
I love that.
Oh my God. Well, this has been an absolute blast. I'm so thrilled that we finally made it happen with
Likewise.
almost full eyesight.
Almost. I feel
Almost
like
full
we're
eyesight.
pretty much there. Pretty
Okay,
much
cool,
there.
cool, cool. And yeah, hopefully we feel that you're part of our community. So if you're ever interested in coming back, maybe we can have like a bestie episode.
Oh
Yes.
my God,
This
Mel and I
will be
together. We would laugh a
yes, our
lot.
first Latinx group episode. But it's been a joy. So thank you for joining us today, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good rest
Bye.
of your week. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Modern People Leader. We really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. and connect with us on LinkedIn. We wanna know what you think about the show, and yeah, you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. So thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.